everybody. Sunil asked me to talk about diversity and inclusion. This is actually a talk that I gave at one of our workshops when we were working on developing the white paper for diversity and inclusion. So I'm just going to talk about some stuff today, that's all. So sit back and relax. So first question, what is diversity to you? And this is one of the things that we really try to get people to think more broadly in terms of diversity. Often people tend to fix on gender diversity or ethnic and racial diversity. And one of the things that you find is that there's all kinds of different types of diversity that we want to be cognizant of. Thinking styles, and a lot of these, a lot of it comes from the environment that the individual is raised in, the things that the individual is exposed to, that often determine things like their thinking style, like their language, their skill set, the experiences that they've had, how old someone is or how young someone is in terms of experience and exposure, the different cultures people come from, and then, the things that we tend to think about all the time, gender and race and physical abilities, sexual orientation, et cetera. So there are some really broad ways of looking at diversity. And so that's one of the things I want to encourage everybody associated with this ERC to do, is to think about diversity in the broadest sense. And we can work with it from there. So the next question is, and I can't, there it is. So what is inclusion? And, people talk about that. There's a lot of words out there now. There's diversity, there's inclusion, there's equity, there's equality, all kinds of things. But basically the difference is diversity is literally counting. If you think about it, diversity means how many of this type do I have? How many of this type do I have? Do I have the broad range of different types that I could possibly have? And how many do I have of each? Whereas inclusion is different. Inclusion is more what this graphic actually says. It's actually being included in the activities that are going on. People welcoming you in, making you feel part of the culture, part of the work that's being done, making you feel that your opinions are valued and are wanted. Those are things that deal with inclusion. And so that's really what we want to work with, is the idea that if we make and create a truly inclusive organization, then we will get diversity because people will want to join the organization that we have. So that's kind of the perspective that we want to use. So then we look at things like equity and equality and justice, and ask ourselves, what's the difference between these? So there's some graphics about this as well. So when you start looking at equality, for example, okay, equality is you give everybody the same thing. And we've got this assumption that everybody benefits from these same supports in some way, shape, or form. And in this particular case, as you can see, giving everybody the same thing does not necessarily facilitate the end result that we would want, which is everybody experiencing the same thing. So then you look at equity, and in equity, the difference is we give everybody the supports that they need. So the concept of affirmative action is something that reflects equity. And this is, now we've got a situation where everybody gets what they need in order to be able to see the game in this particular case, right? And finally, justice is slightly different than these. Both of these, equality and equity, seek to alter what we provide to individuals so that they can achieve the same goal, okay, so that they get the same things. With justice, what we're looking at is we're not giving people anything. What we're doing is actually removing the cause of the inequity. And in that case, we don't have to give people anything particular because we've removed what was prohibiting them from enjoying the full benefits of the situation. So that's the difference between these three. And it's fairly important that we understand that. Now, what have we got? Well, we have equality. We have systems where equity is being tried, but this is what the reality is. We have very, very vastly different mechanisms of treating people. And diversity tends to fail because the inclusion, the equity, and the equality are lacking in our efforts. Okay, we put all these different people together without any regard for their differences and without providing them the proper tools to address these differences among us. And then we act all shocked and surprised when we have misunderstandings, when we have disagreements, and we're even more surprised when our diversity then takes a dive. So this is what we have to be concerned about. And the fact is, it's not the differences that divide us, it's the inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. So again, it's not the attitude is not, and I'll take race as an example, the attitude is not supposed to be, I am colorblind. That's not what we want. What we want is for people to recognize that we all come in different colors and that our different colors often reflect our different experiences, and we need to rejoice and take advantage of those things and celebrate those things. Okay, so that's where we're going. That's what we want this ERC to have, is this culture of inclusion where all kinds of differences among people are celebrated. And the other piece is that we talked about a lot in the workshop is it's not just the ERC itself, the faculty, the students, it's the entire organization with which the ERC interacts. So we're not just going to talk about diversity within the ERC in terms of diversity of faculty or diversity of students, but we also talked about how important it is to consider the diversity of the stakeholders in the outcomes of the ERC. The people who are going to be utilizing these outcomes, the research outcomes of the ERC, are going to come from all kinds of different background environments. And we need to be able to recognize the diversity of those environments and how important it is to what we want to achieve. Okay, so now you get into things like the leadership, and it really is about the leadership. This is very, very top down. The leadership of the ERC often sets the tone for how we interact with each other. And so we need the leadership to be very purposeful about their commitment to diversity. What is important? How are we going to do this? Why are we concerned about this? Whose responsibility is it to ensure that we have an inclusive environment? All of these things are important from the leadership perspective. And so you have to make conscious changes in how you do things as a leader. And these are, these are very simple concepts. But for example, when you talk about meetings, right? And I tend to do this. I organize a meeting and I go in and I run the meeting, and there's no need necessarily for me to necessarily run the meeting depending on the topic. So I can have other people run meetings, mix up the group, get different ideas from individuals. You can do the same thing with presentations. Why is the thrust leader always the one that gives the presentation when there are other people involved in the research that can also give the presentation and present it perhaps a different perspective? You've also got work teams. You want to tend to vary your work teams. Don't put the same people on the same teams all the time. Again, to get some differences of thought, differences of experiences impacting the issues that we're looking at. So again, strong leadership means don't allow bad behavior. Students, I was at a review one time, and apparently one of the things that happened, they were doing a discussion. This was an ERC. They were doing a group discussion education activity on diversity. And they got about 10, 15 minutes into it, and two of the faculty members got up and walked out. Now, we don't know why they walked out. We found out later why they walked out, but it gave a really bad impression to the students who were there, thinking that this is a really important activity, and our faculty members just walked out. Things like that need to be addressed. And when I say addressed, maybe ask why they walked out and explain. Maybe they had another appointment. Maybe they thought that this wasn't worth their time, in which case, yeah, we need to address that. You want to do things like recognize and celebrate religious and cultural holidays. amongst the group. You want to make sure you use things like gender neutral language, them, they, and those. You want to make sure your spaces are all accessible. And this is, again, this is leadership. This is the leadership of the ERC, of the organization. You want to consider individual needs. You want to promote flexibility is a good thing. You want to make sure that there is, and I tend to call it diversity education. People don't like the word training, so that's fine. We can educate people on cultures of inclusion, on creating a culture of inclusion, and get them involved in it. People need to understand what it is we want to create, and they need to be involved in what it is we want to create. So, confirmation bias. You know, one of those interesting things, there are often objective facts, okay? Things that people choose to believe or not, okay? Then there are things that can confirm your beliefs, and sometimes those things may be valuable, and sometimes they can be considered foolish almost. But the intersection of those two things is what you actually see and what you actually believe. So you get this confirmation bias. So we have to be aware of that, because what happens is it's a cognitive bias. It's a way of thinking that tends to favor information that confirms what we've already believed or we are already biased on. So we need to be very, very careful about that. And it requires fairly selective analysis and interpretation of data. You know, you want to seek out as much data as you can. You don't want to just seek out what supports your particular beliefs in something. So we have to accept that biases exist, and we all know this. Everybody's seen the stuff on implicit biases, all the data that shows that it can actually impact the outcomes, and we don't want that to happen. So finally, I just say, you know, our differences are the one thing that we all have in common. None of us are the same, thank goodness. It would be a truly boring world. So we need to recognize and accept and celebrate the differences that we all bring to the table. And I think we will recognize that we're better off for it. So, Sunil, that's all that I had to present. Let me get back.
Right, perfect. So any quick question, comments? I mean, we will have a full discussion, but any quick question, comments for Bev before we move to John?
Okay.
I have one.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Hi, Bev, thank you very much for your presentation. This is Jim Horn from EPA.
Mm-hmm.
Would you give me the 1 minute sort of run through between equality, equity, and justice again?
Okay, so equality basically says we give everybody the same thing. So everybody gets, you know, where everybody gets the same exact thing. It doesn't matter what you need, okay? Equity means that you get what you need.
Right.
So in that particular case, the shorter person got the bigger box. Justice is removing the fence. Justice is saying we all have exactly what we need to address a particular situation, as long as the situation is presented in a manner that makes it equal for all of us. So in that particular case, we didn't give anybody anything. We just changed the fence. And so everybody could see what they needed to see. And we really didn't have to, and that's what we want to do. We want to, while it's a great thing to help people become equal by giving them something, it's better to remove the cause of the inequality, because that impacts everybody the same way. Did that help?
It does. In an organizational setting, though, I would say, as a practical matter, the whole equity conversation is really critical at this point, especially I'm interested in water workforce, and I'll be speaking about that the next couple of days. But that's where I think there are a lot of effort needs to be made to find out basically what particular groups need that we would like to attract to the water workforce. They may need different things. Correct. They may need to be communicated to in different ways, and that's all fine. That's a very important thing because it's a way to help them be part of this goal that I think we're all trying to support through this conference and many other venues.
Yes, absolutely agree.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, Bev, we have one question in the chat box. Can I read that for you? Can you give an example of how One Water builds equity and justice in terms of property-based infrastructure? It may be a little too technical, Bev,
Yeah,
for you.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure I understand what property-based infrastructure is.
Yeah, Kevin, can you unmute and talk? No, who asked from RainGrid?
I did. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah,
Sorry,
now
Beverly.
go.
I'm sorry to burden you with a technical question. It's always been curious to me how we in One Water, and particularly in water infrastructure, differentiate between public infrastructure and infrastructure on private property. And within the realm of One Water, we're looking at breaking down the barriers between the private property side of the world and the public infrastructure, centralized infrastructure side of the world. So there's what you say resonates a lot with respect to that differentiation.
I don't know if anybody else saw it. One of my favorite shows is CBS Sunday Morning, and I watch it religiously every Sunday. And they did a thing on water, I don't know, maybe a month or so ago, talking about the fact that people in the US do not have running water, that there are cities, not cities, but towns and localities and municipalities that do not have running water. And that's where you get into this real inequity because and again, my ignorance, but isn't that something that the government's supposed to provide? You know, aren't we supposed to have running water for people? And how come these people have it and these people don't? And don't tell me it's because these people have money and these people don't, because that's not what it's supposed to be about. So yeah, this is actually, you know, this is actually a really interesting topic with respect to diversity, because it really does get down into individual communities. And that's huge.